All right, looks like we have everybody in our room and we're live on Facebook. So I want to welcome our viewers both on Zoom and on Facebook. I'm Jeffrey Pickett. I'm the Community Outreach Strategist for the Lowell Public Schools. And we will be going over for the next hour our plans for expanding in-person learning come the month of April. Before we get into today's presentation with Superintendent Boyd and members of the cabinet, I want to turn things over again to my colleague, Vinak Kin, who will give you instructions on how to have ASL interpretation for this forum and also how to receive Portuguese interpretation if you are looking to have this presentation in Portuguese. Vinak?
If you would like to listen to Portuguese during this session, please click the interpretation button below and then select Portuguese. If you would like to view ASL during this presentation, please hover your mouse over Linda Matisse's screen. At the top right corner of Linda's screen, you'll see 3 dots. Click the 3 dots and click Pin so you can focus on ASL interpretation.
Great, thank you, Vinak. And Linda, thank you for providing this service for our families. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Joel Boyd.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, families, for joining us. Families, if you joined us for yesterday's session, today's session is much the same as yesterday in terms of information, but we will be able to get into the question and answer portion for the second half. So, and of course, the question and answers will differ from yesterday's question and answer, depending on what the audience is asking and interested in today. But before I start, I want to say thank you to all of our families and staff. It's about almost exactly a year from the day that we ultimately had to close our schools initially for COVID-19. At that time, we thought it was going to be just 2 weeks, and we thought at that time how significant 2 weeks of closure was. Now, for many of our families, it's been a full year since they've been on campus. We've fortunately been able to bring back more and more students this year. We have approximately 3,000 students full-time on our campuses currently, and we're now looking towards April with the Governor and Commissioner of Education's latest requirements, which we'll walk you through here today, bringing back more and more students on April 5th, and then for elementary, and then following the spring break. So all students in grades K through 8 who are interested in coming back to full-time in person will have that option, and we'll talk a little bit about the high school as we get into the presentation. But a big thank you to staff, families. This has been an extraordinarily difficult year in every walk of life, and educationally, it's been a complete redesign of everything that we do to create this type of virtual environment, and it's really tested the home and school partnership, and our families have risen to the occasion unlike any families anywhere else. Our staff has risen to the occasion unlike any staff anywhere else, and together we've really seen, while not the same as in person, certainly the best possibility for virtual and remote learning. And I want to thank everybody for all of your hard work. And again, I'm excited that we're able to share with you today on approach to expanding in-person learning. But families, if remote learning is working for you, you'll continue to have that option for the rest of the year. Jeffrey, if we can start the presentation in the slide deck.
Sure.
All right, so you'll see the title here is Meeting DESE's Revised Regulations for Structured Learning Time. So structured learning time is the legal language around what's allowed to count as a school day. DESE recently changed what's allowed to count as a school day, and that's what's dictating statewide every school district basically following the same timeline we're going to share with you about expanding in-person learning. And we'll share a little bit with you about that. Next slide. As we move through this agenda. So we'll do a little bit of a review about the guiding principles we've used since last summer about for reopening within the context of COVID-19. We'll share with you the commissioner's guidance. We'll provide to you, back, Jeffrey?
Yep, sorry about that.
We'll provide for you a summary. We'll provide you a summary of both the opportunities and challenges so that we can provide for you really as clear a picture as possible from a district level. But we'll also share with you what you should expect to be hearing from your schools, because you'll also have the opportunity to participate in family information sessions at the school level, because there will be some school by school differences just based on layout and configuration of each school. So understanding what that looks like at the school level and then also the classroom level for your child, you'll have that opportunity as well. And we'll share with you what this will look like between now then and April 5th or April 26th, depending on the age of your child. Next slide. So for those of you that joined us for these sessions when we first began them back in August, you remember us laying out these guiding principles, which continue to guide every decision we make about school opening. That's that our decisions will be guided by the latest health data and input from public health experts. You'll hear from Dr. Hall about what we've learned now in terms of the research around COVID-19, specifically around social distancing. Two, we're going to maximize options for you as a family. So we will continue to offer the option of remote learning while we also continue to expand in-person learning for families that choose to do so. And we're making a commitment to equity. Those of you who took part in our lottery system at the beginning of the year to make sure that we can provide as much in-person learning for our most vulnerable learners as possible. Again, 3,000 students that have had the opportunity for full-time in-person learning, up to what will be almost 2 months prior to the April expansion, really through our commitment to equity and make sure families and students who have historically been underserved have had a voice in the planning process. Next slide. All right, so the commissioner's guidance, it's a lengthy document, but these 2 paragraphs differentiate this guidance from all of the past information you maybe heard came out from the state. So what this says is that this is not optional guidance, these are legal regulations. And they're not optional, which means the school committee can't vote to go with a different model. If you recall from back in the summer, each local school committee, including ours here in Lowell, was making determinations about the model that best represented what the community's COVID data, the community's readiness for in-person learning and families' needs. That's no longer the case. It's a state model dictated by law, and that's what we're going to be walking you through. Next slide. All right, so here's what the state has mandated. 3 phases, elementary school phase, Monday, April 5th. And we're going to walk you through what that looks like here. The state calls elementary grades K through 5. Our elementary schools are only K through 4, but we are going to be welcoming back K through 5 on April 5th. That includes also 1 grade of our middle schools. The middle school phase 6 through 8, the state has stated April 28th, but our school calendar has us returning from spring break on April 26th. So we're going to be welcoming back grades 6 through 8 on April 26th, right after April vacation. And then the high school phase, we're going to have to await the guidance from the state on high school. They said they're going to provide additional details, but our high school is a bit unique, and I'm going to walk you through that a bit because we have the 2nd largest high school in the Commonwealth. So we're going to continue to plan, instead of full-time in person, for a hybrid model after spring break, but we have to also wait for DESE guidance because obviously we can't do something outside of the law. But our high school is a bit unique here in Lowell in that it's a citywide high school and it's the 2nd largest in the Commonwealth. So we'll share a little bit with you about that. Next slide. So this is what it looks like, what I just shared in 1 snapshot, 1 page. April 5th, 5 days per week for elementary school grades. That's grades K through 4 with the parental option of full remote. April 5th for grade 5 at our middle schools, 5 days per week with, again, parental option for remote. April 26th, 5 days per week, grades 6 through 8, and we'll also continue with the option for full remote. And then April 26th, also, we're planning for a hybrid model at Lowell High School with a lunchtime dismissal, again, to try to make sure that we can keep our community safe. But that one that we're planning for, we still haven't received state guidance on, so we are awaiting guidance before we finalize it. But high school students and high school families, that's what we're planning for towards April 26th. Next slide. Okay, preschool students. So we're here, the state requirement is around elementary K through 5. So preschool students, if you're assigned to the Cardinal O'Connell Early Learning Center and you're currently remote, we're working towards making sure that we can provide you with access to in-person instruction on April 5th. However, students at other schools, while we work to provide a safe return for K through 5, we're going to be doing that on April 5th and then reassessing the space and whether we can provide safely for also pre-K. So you'll be hearing about pre-K at a later time. If you're at the Cardinal O'Connell, that's going to be a bit of a different model than if you're a pre-K student remotely at our other schools, which have to maximize the space around K to 5 based on the new state law. Next slide. All right. Now, when you make a decision, family, and your principals will be reaching out to you if you haven't already heard from them. You did a survey initially prior to the new law taking hold. So our principals are reaching out to all families again. You'll be making a determination, and we're going to get these determinations finalized across the district by the end of the week. So if you haven't heard yet, you will be, for what the April 5th and April 26th return decisions are. We're asking you as families to hold to those decisions for a month, and then you can reconsider the next month, because we have to make sure that we can continue to provide a quality learning environment, and students moving back and forth daily would be a challenge for the other students that are remaining for continuing to participate in a quality learning environment. So you'll make a decision for April 5th, and then you'll have the opportunity to either continue with that decision or change your mind for May 3rd for K through 5, for April 26th for 6 through 12, and then again on May 24th. And also on May 24th, that'll be the last transition point, K to 5. You'll make your final decision, whether that's staying in person or shifting between for the remainder of the school year. And again, that stability and continuity, we think that's as flexible as we can be while making sure that every student is continuing to participate in a stable and quality learning environment. Next slide. All right, so I mentioned that our high school is a bit unique. In addition to the fact that it's so large, also at the high school level, every student basically is on their own schedule, meaning there's a lot of transitions, a lot of public movement in common spaces, hallways, and so on, because every student may be with their one set of peers first period and then a completely different set of peers second period. And we can't change up those schedules because every student is on a different graduation trajectory. So the stability and continuity for the high school schedule is unique and must be weighed carefully within the context of COVID-19. So we're going to be planning for our high school a little bit differently. Right now, we're planning towards a hybrid approach so that we can still bring in students in person. That would be planning towards April 26th. But again, an important disclaimer, we are still awaiting final guidance from the state, from DESE, regarding what will be legally allowable at the high school level. So if you're not following the state's requirements and it's not a family choice, then those days won't count as school days for our students. And that's the big difference between this guidance and other guidance the state's provided before. So families, if you're choosing remote, it'll continue to count as a school day for your students. But if students are being required to participate in remote against a family's decision, it wouldn't be. Next slide. All right, so Dr. Hall, our Chief Operating Officer, is going to share with you what this will look like operationally in terms of our school facilities and what the research is currently saying, so that to share with you how we are continuing to prioritize safety within our school buildings. Then Ms. Desmond, our Chief Academic Officer, will share with you what it will look like instructionally from the district level. But again, stay tuned for your school-based information sessions that'll be specific to your school-by-school differences across the district. Dr. Hall?
Thank you, Dr. Boyd. Good afternoon, everyone. So at the top here, it shows that DESE has been advancing that 3 feet of social distancing has been safe when masks have been worn, and other mitigation strategies are in place. And recently, there's been scientific studies conducted on the distance of 1 foot, 3 feet, and 6 feet. And what they've concluded and what DESE is endorsing is if both parties have a mask, there's no difference between 3 feet and 6 feet in regards to spreading COVID-19. And that's only if both parties have a mask. If one has a mask and the other doesn't, the odds go up. But if both parties are wearing a mask, there is no scientific difference between 3 feet and 6 feet. Next slide, please. To make things safer too, we've launched pool testing. The state is paying for this up through April. However, we need consent from families for a pool test to be conducted on a student. If you wanted to consent, you can obtain that from the principal, even text the principal or email the principal, or you could fill out this form that's available on our website. And while this data is, I think, a week or so old, initial pool tests in schools have come back with a very low positivity rate. And the more people that get tested, the safer these schools will be for the children and teachers. So it's highly recommended. Next slide, please. So we're also attempting to make the schools even more safer with infrastructure changes. We've added air purifiers to each classroom. Additionally, from what the city bought initially, we've received an additional 50 purifiers from DESE, and we've ordered 100 additional backup purifiers, so there'll be one in each classroom. We're also adjusting the filters on the purifiers, and the city has been doing a lot of work on exhaust ventilation and fresh air intakes. And whereas in September, only less than 50% were probably operational, they're now up to 87% of exhaust, ventilation, and fresh air tank working. Next slide, please. So as I stressed earlier, the difference between 3 feet and 6 feet of social distancing is only going to work if both parties are masked. However, with eating, that's going to create situations where one or two parties or even more are not masked. So we're going to have to take extra precautions in keeping children 6 feet away from each other while they're eating lunch. So children may be eating outside or in small groups and outside the classroom, or if the class is small enough, sometimes in their classes. Additionally, the school committee authorized a new position called flex worker for the cafeterias, who are working on high touch point cleaning and delivering hot meals to the students. Additionally, as you'll see on the next slide, we're trying to open up 2 new elementary cafeterias per week over the next 2 to 3 weeks. And here are the K-8 cafeterias or elementary school cafeterias that will be opening soon. Next slide, please. So transportation, one of the challenges with transportation are there are not enough drivers that are applying for transportation jobs. So we have 35 buses in operation right now. We're attempting to get up to 50, but there just aren't enough available drivers with the license that you need to drive a school bus. So we're going to maintain the grade 1 through 6 policy that was passed by the committee in September for now. However, we'll continue to study getting as many students on the buses as we can. However, there is a risk to that. The more children that are on the buses, the more possibility that COVID could spread amongst the buildings, and people that have tested positive a lot have been the monitors or the bus drivers who come into contact with a lot of students. So again, please make sure your student has their mask on before they approach the bus. That'll be helpful to all. Next slide, please. So there are some challenges when you have a large workforce and people have different issues going on in their life or with their family. There may be some teachers who are in the highest tier of risk who may opt to continue to teach remotely. So if your student is in person, they may not have their teacher that they're used to with them. Instead, there'll be a paraprofessional or another teacher or an administrator who may be facilitating the instruction from that teacher coming into the classroom remotely. Additionally, if someone doesn't have a highest tier of health risk as determined by the CDC, they also can opt for a leave of absence. If that occurred, we would hire a new teacher to take the place of that teacher. So in that instance, you may be opting to come in person, and you may have an entirely new teacher to support that instruction. Next slide, please. We're trying to get everyone, all the staff members that we can, vaccinated as soon as possible. We had some success with 350 Lowell School personnel getting vaccinated on February 25th and 6th, and they're soon going to have their second shot. Additionally, the Senior Center provided 200 vaccines this week, and today as well. There have been multiple employees who are getting vaccines in Haverhill and Methuen. We continue to work on additional opportunities for that, and the Commonwealth is going to have 4 appointments starting next Saturday just for educational personnel to try to get as many people working in schools vaccinated as possible. Next slide, please. Oh, and with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Desmond.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. So we are preparing for the concurrent instructional models, which means that if your student chooses to stay remote, the instructional model will not significantly change, but it will incorporate in-person learners, meaning that the platforms will stay the same that we'll be utilizing during the school day, and the schedules should, for the most part, remain the same. The Office of Teaching and Learning currently is providing a menu of professional development for all of our school-based staff that will be assigned to concurrent classrooms. And this PD will help to support teachers in creating the concurrent teaching models for their lessons, which will allow them to continue to provide the same instruction to the remote learners as the in-person learners. There will be 6 hours of professional development provided for our staff, and it will be available the week of the 22nd of March. Next slide, Jeffrey. So just as a recap of what we're looking at as far as challenges for our students and staff when moving to an in-person model with a concurrent remote instructional model present, is that we need to look at, for students coming back to in-person, minimizing the need to travel between classes and buildings, maintaining all of the mitigation strategies, those important strategies of hand sanitizing, social distancing, wearing masks. We're going to have to look at classroom rosters. For the most part, we do not expect that students will be moved from their current classroom teacher unless there is a reason that is unpreventable, so that we can be providing the best instruction possible. But for the most part, we are planning to keep everything very similar to what students have been experiencing so far. And then again, we're implementing effective strategies for concurrent instruction. Next slide, Jeffrey. Some of the other items, as Dr. Hall spoke about, there's transportation that needs to be resolved. We'll be implementing air purifiers in rooms that we haven't been using so far. And then we'll be making sure that social distancing remains in place for any of the meal times or the breaks. And then the other thing is through our family engagement office, we'll be orienting families again to the health protocols that are expected to be utilized in class for an in-person learning. We will be utilizing two-way instruction for health information, providing choice again for instructional models. So if families do not want to send their student back to in-person, the remote option is still available through the end of the school year. And then there will be more information coming regarding transportation and scheduling. Next slide, Jeffrey. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chief Phillips to discuss the information sessions that are upcoming.
Thank you. So we know how critical information is for our families right now as they make the best decisions for their students, for their children. And so yesterday and today we've held centralized sessions to give you as much information as we have available. But we also want you to know that there will be small group multilingual sessions that are scheduled from tomorrow and also into next week. Those sessions will be led by our bilingual family liaisons, and there will be an opportunity for presentation and discussion in Khmer, Portuguese, Spanish, and Swahili. And we also have a Spanish language session coming up this evening at 5 p.m. And also, we really encourage you to attend your school's school-based orientation. Those also will be scheduled beginning tomorrow through the coming week. And so you'll get that information directly from your school. We'll make sure that that information is on our website as well. But at these sessions, you'll be able to hear directly from your school about the details that you need as our students prepare to return for in-person.
And this graphic is showing you the many phases that we have been in or underway this school year. Phase one of the first arrow here is indicating where we were at the beginning of the year through February 22nd on to March 1. Phase two will begin on April 5th. And again, focus in on the expanding beyond the 25% that have been in session. And then phase three will begin on April 26th with the expansion of to our secondary school. So this graphic is just sort of tearing out the various phases that we've been through and where each of our sets or types of schools actually fall in those categories. Next slide. Our final slide of the presentation emphasizes the next steps that we're taking. As Chief Phillips just mentioned, March 15th and 16th are the district-wide forums. Our family or school-based forums are shortly thereafter, and those sessions will be publicized on the district website, as well as shared in the social media platforms, as well as communicated by the school communities. And I know a few school communities are starting their sessions as soon as tomorrow night. So make sure that you are checking in on those, and we'll make sure that our school leaders put that information out to you. March 20th through the 25th will be the professional development series of dates for staff. And then certainly the time frame that began on March 10th through March 29th, schools are really doubling down, making sure that they are reaching out to each and every family, working closely with staff, fine-tuning schedules, and making adjustments to class rosters as needed. And we certainly want to make sure that our families are aware of all of the parameters that are going into these decisions. Certainly, we're super excited about April 5th, expanding more seats for our K through 5. And then April 26th, looking at the opportunity to bring in grades 6 through 8. And then certainly April 26th, looking at bringing more students back to the high school. And with that, I'll pass the mic back to Dr. Boyd, Mr. Pickett.
Thank you, Linus. Thank you, families. We're going to transition to answering some questions. So families, if you were just here for the information portion of the session, that concludes the information portion. Now we'll transition to a Q&A section. And Jeffrey, if you can help facilitate us through the questions that were asked in the chat. Now, families, please feel free to put questions in the chat. However, I want to tell you up front, we never have enough time to answer all of the questions. We'll try our very best to answer as many as we can, but we do need to conclude at 4 o'clock on the dot. Jeffrey?
Yes, so Dr. Boyd, we received a question. When can we consent to pool testing if our child is going back on April 5th?
Dr. Hall, can you share a little bit more about pool testing and the consent form and deadlines?
Sure, I'm just trying to get out of the chat, sorry. So on the pool testing, there was a good question by someone saying, if my child's coming back on April 5th, can I consent now? And I responded, if you are in favor of pool testing, I'd encourage you to send an email to your student's principal right now, just to lock in your consent. You don't have to wait until you return back in person to do that. You could just specify, my child will be in there on April 5th. I'd like them to participate in pool testing on the first available opportunity.
We also received a question that we received yesterday as well, just discussing the reasoning behind returning in person now with only a few months left in the school year.
Yeah, so this schedule is determined by state law. So every school district in the Commonwealth will be returning on this same schedule. Now, the reason that it's important, I think, is twofold. One, for many of our children, every day in person is a valuable day. And if you're finding benefit from the remote environment, I'm really grateful that you're finding that benefit. You'll have that option to stay remote. Students who want to come back in person each day for them could be really, really valuable. And there is approximately 50 days as somebody mentioned. Now, the second part of that twofold explanation is that we're working towards as normal as possible reopening in September next year across all of our schools and across the state. So this is a phased approach working towards next school year as well. So every day is important in person for many families. It also allows us to build towards next year. It is the state law, so every district in the Commonwealth will be following it. But if you are a family who's benefiting from remote, you will have the option this year to continue the year remotely.
If we had a question, are all elementary school students guaranteed a space in person on April 5th?
Yes, if you choose in person as your option as a family, you will be provided with a seat in person.
We also had a question, what would happen if a student says he or she is coming back in person and after a few days they want to be remote? So what's the process in terms of changing your mind?
All right, so you're going to work with your school. And again, we're asking families to commit to 1 month that if you make a decision on for April 5th, you stay with it until the beginning of May. However, if something comes up with your family that requires you to shift from in-person to remote, if something were to occur that requires you to shift immediately, you'll work with your school, you work with your principal to make sure that we can maintain your quality learning environment for you as you shift. Families, you won't be able to shift, however, from remote to in-person in that 1 month span. You're going to make a decision now, and then that'll hold from April 5th to May, to beginning of May, and then you'll have an opportunity to change your mind again to go from remote to in-person. But again, if you have an emergency that shifts you from full in-person to remote, you'll work with your principal and your school to do that in a way that keeps instruction going in a high quality way.
We had a question, will teachers be instructing live in-person students and remote students at the same time?
The quick answer is yes, but I'm going to have Ms. Desmond, can you share a little bit more about the concurrent teaching model and how that'll work in schools?
Yes, so the, all of our teachers who are returning have equipment, camera equipment to utilize to live stream what's going on in the classroom to the students who are remote. Our recommendation for teachers are to continue to use the instructional models they've been using remotely and adapt them so that that model is utilized for both remote and in-person students. We would expect our in-person students to also be bringing their Chromebooks with them to school because we want to limit the number of papers and materials that are being distributed to students. We want the students to be using their own device that they can keep and maintain sanitized and not utilized by other students.
We received a question, how do we let our school know our decision if we're remote or in person?
Yeah. So Dr. Guillory, can you share how the schools are going about reaching out to families? And everybody should have heard from their school. If you haven't yet, you'll definitely be hearing from them by the end of the week. Dr. Guillory, can you share what that'll look like for families that haven't heard from their schools yet?
Absolutely. So I know some schools, parents, the district has sent out an initial survey, I think back in mid-February or early February, that was due mid-February, where parents gave some indication of whether they wanted to explore the in-person options or remain remote for the rest of the year. Since that time, some schools have done one-to-one phone calls for every family. Some schools have put out dojo messages and contacted families directly through their teacher. Some schools are still in the process of following up. So I know greater emphasis right now is on grades K through 5. So if your student is in grade 6 and above, they may not have gotten to you as of this moment, but certainly if you have a choice or want to give indication to that, you can certainly give your school a call and ask to speak to the principal or send them an email, certainly, or give the message to the school clerk as well, or the assistant principal. But the idea is that we want to make sure that every family is aware. And so schools are communicating with families. They're going to be hosting their sessions. These sessions that are coming up as well in the coming weeks or in the coming days in some schools' case. So you want to make sure that you're taking every opportunity to hear what's happening at your child's school and not what may be happening at a friend of yours school, because there may be slight refinements in that based on the needs of each individual school community. So my message to you at this point, if you've not heard from your school, reach out to them, but certainly sign up to participate in their forum, much like you're doing here, and your questions can be directly answered in that way.
Thank you. Question about MCAS and if we have an update about what MCAS testing will be like this spring.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Guillory, can you share the details on MCAS as we know it today?
Yes, I'll have to pull up the specifics, so I'll throw that in the chat, and I think in a few minutes. But right now for grades 3 through 8, the state it has postponed or shifted the dates back to later in May for the administration timeframe. There'll be segments of the exam that is given or being administered, which means that it's going to be a shorter window, a testing window as such. So for math, ELA, and then as well as the STEM assessment or the STE assessment. So those dates, we'll make sure that we get that information and share it in the chat for you, but that's coming at a little bit of a later time. The testing that's presently, a window that's presently open is the access test, and that window is open now through mid-May for our language learners or our families, our students that have that designation. So multiple windows are open right now, and we don't have any information at this point on the high school MCAS test as such. So we're expecting that information at a later time as well.
We had a question about meal sites, specifically for those students who will be staying remote for the rest of the school year. We've been operating, of course, meal sites for the past year remotely, and this parent was wondering if those sites would continue.
Dr. Hall?
Yes, I answered a chat question in regards to that earlier. We're continuing those sites through the school year that have been in operation since last spring.
Thank you. We had another question. If somebody stays remote, if a student stays remote, will they continue to have the same teacher?
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. So our goal is to maintain as consistent as possible our teacher-student relationships. Our goal is not to shift students among classrooms. There will be some classroom-specific situations possibly where that's unavoidable. If that's the case, your school will be reaching out to you, we'll be sharing that with you. But our goal is to keep consistent student-teacher relationships, continuity in our class schedules, which is why we're moving to a concurrent or simultaneous teaching model so that teachers can teach both students in person and remotely at the same time. That's to keep those student-teacher relationships consistent. There may be some exceptions to that rule, and your school will be reaching out to you if for some reason it's unavoidable to keep those rosters consistent.
We've received a couple questions about April vacation and if there'll be requirements about quarantining for families that decide to travel over April vacation.
So we're asking all families, particularly those that are in person, to follow the state's guidelines on travel. The state has updated its guidelines on travel. We're going to be abiding by the state's requirements, and we're asking all of our families to as well. We'll make sure that we provide out reminders to families about what those requirements are as they evolve, but stay tuned to the state of Massachusetts guidance. We're asking everybody to follow the state's guidance on travel today and into the future. As that guidance gets updated, we'll update our guidance as well.
If a Lowell High student, will they still have the option to stay fully remote even during the hybrid model starting April 26th at Lowell High?
Yes, that's our plan. Our plan is that at all grade levels, families will have the choice to stay full remote. The question at Lowell High School really is whether the hybrid model is going to be allowed by the state or not. The state is not allowing the hybrid model to be utilized K through 8. We're planning for that model at the high school, and we're awaiting additional guidance from the state. And as I shared earlier, there's a reason we're planning for that hybrid model, but that wouldn't take away the option of full remote if students and families are choosing full remote at the high school model. That'll stay.
Here's a good question. What is the default decision made by the schools if a parent does not make a decision or does not communicate their decision to their school for either in-person or remote learning? So in other words, if you don't hear from a family as to which model they would prefer, what's the default?
So our schools are making sure to reach out to all families, connect with your school. It's really vital that you have that conversation. If the school reaches out to you, please respond. Fortunately for us, we've had among the highest average daily attendance of urban districts in the Commonwealth during remote learning. We were at 94% of our students on average attending daily for the second quarter of school. So our schools feel confident they'll be able to reach each family, and families, please make sure you pick up the phone, respond. It's important that we connect with all families. There's not a default model. The model is the choice of the family, and we're working to make sure we can connect with every family.
We had a question about, I believe Ms. Desmond had addressed this, but just to reiterate about Chromebooks in terms of instruction. This question was, will students need to return their Chromebooks if they go back in person?
No, Jeffrey, thank you for the question. We are at a 1-to-1 ratio with devices for our students. And so the expectation would be that our students would utilize those devices. We want to minimize the amount of materials that are being distributed to students when they're in person. So the majority of the work that would be provided to students in person would be completed using their device.
Thank you. We have a question about wondering what the deadline is for informing schools of the choice between being remote or being in person.
Say the question again, Jeffrey.
Sure. This parent was wondering what the deadline was for informing the school of their choice between being remote or in person.
Friday, this Friday is the deadline we're asking all families to meet. The day for this Friday, let me pull up a calendar. That's Friday the 19th, March 19th, for those of you that may be watching this on a recording.
Let's see, going through some other questions. If you have any other questions, we have about 10 minutes left, a little bit less. Please leave the questions in either the chat or the Q&A. We had a question actually I wanted to bring up that we didn't get to yesterday about the school calendar. I noticed that a few questions popped up in yesterday's session wondering if we would be adhering to the calendar as it's currently printed and ending the school year in June like we usually do.
Yes, the answer to that is yes, the current school calendar will hold. That's part of the state's requirements for us to go back to in-person learning, is making sure that all of our days count as school days. That's the legal requirement there. Now, in addition to that, we are planning for an expanded summer school program. So we are working to expand summer school, but that won't change the last day of school. The last day of school and the school calendar will hold.
Great, thank you. We had a question about a 7th grade student receiving transportation if they have a 504 plan. So I know that you had gone over transportation specifically for grades 1 to 6. If we had any guidance about anybody who maybe is on either an IEP or a 504.
So anybody that has individualized plans, 504s, IEPs, make sure you stay in conversation with your school. All of those accommodations that are built within those plans will be met, but I'd have to really look at the plan and see what the accommodation was, because they are individualized plans by definition. So make sure that you're able to stay in conversation with your school and have that kind of individualized conversation that we wouldn't be able to have here in this type of forum. But those individualized accommodations that are provided, we'll be able to provide and accommodate those depending on how they're written.
We had a question wondering if a particular school had not had their session by this Friday. Some schools are still having the sessions into next week. If there was a little bit of lenience in terms of making the decision, if they weren't sure of what the school's plan was yet.
So you should be able to get information on your school's plan and the school session should be in addition to. Make sure you talk with your school. The reason for this Friday is we've got to build out transportation routes for all of the students that are eligible. Your schools want to make sure that they can build out the most welcoming environment for your students. We've got to build out our additional class rosters and schedules. We want to make sure that we can communicate with you for families that may be related to the exceptions around class rostering and teacher schedules. If there's something unique there, we want to make sure you have all of that information. So it's going to be important that schools have time in order to build towards April 5th. If for some reason you change your mind after the session, then stay in touch with your school. But we really want to make sure that we hold to a standard expectation of this Friday to make your decision. And if you talk with your school, they'll be able to give you as specific as possible, even in advance of their family information session.
I'm going to go to Dr. Guillory next, but had a quick follow-up that just wanted to throw out there. A parent wondered, they reached out to their son's teacher and gave their decision. Is that sufficient? They were wondering if there was like a more formal survey that they should have filled out, or if having that conversation with the child's teacher was enough.
Yes, that is sufficient.
Thank you. And Dr. Guillory I believe has an update about MCAS.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I was going to try to share screen.
There we go. Yeah, that's on my end. I just, you should have that capability now.
So again, this is the information that we shared just a few moments ago. that and this information is accurate as of March 5th. So I do want to put that timestamp on it. That the MCAS window for grades 3 through 8 will be shortened. Students will only take one session per subject. DESE is providing maximum flexibility around the scheduling and administration. So schools will be working through the when and where they will be administering. I shared with you the access testing window that our language learners are engaged in. And then for the high schools, the class of 2021 are granted additional competency determinations for ELA and math, meaning that if they pass the subject matter and have that credit on their transcript, that the school can essentially apply for them not to have to take the MCAS if they haven't done that as of yet. And then certainly the information regarding scholarships. So I would definitely, for the high school folks, follow up directly with the high school team on those pieces. And at this point, remote administration of MCAS is not available. And then this slide gives you the targeted dates. So right now for grades 3, 4, and 5 for ELA math and science, technology, engineering exam, that testing window is May 10th through June 11th. For grades 6 through 8 for the ELA math and science, technology, engineering exam, those dates are to be determined, because keep in mind that group is coming in later than the 3rd through 5th graders. And then our high school windows, and again, I would put a big question mark, and they actually say tentative here for these dates for ELA, May 3rd through June 4th, for mathematics, May 3rd through June 4th, and for the science, technology, engineering exam, June 1 through June 11. So that's the most up-to-date information that we have as of March 5th, 2021.
Thank you. So
Jeffrey, I think we have time for one more question. Families, again, apologies if we weren't able to get to your question. We can't get to all of them. We have time though for about one more question. Jeffrey, if you see a high frequency item, I want to make sure that we can just give the courtesy to that last question as possible.
sure,
And then we'll wrap up.
It was helpful yesterday just to reiterate the dates again.
Okay.
We're returning. So I'm going to pull up the screen so that we can bear with me for a moment while I return to that slide. Here we go.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So this is the graphic. This presentation is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to the website. For those of you that just want the quick reference right here now, this would be the slide to take a picture of if you prefer your own kind of photograph record. April 5th, 5 days per week, in-person instruction for our elementary school students with a full option of remote for parents. Again, no impact on those that are already back in person. They won't be shifting back and forth based on these dates. This is simply about students who are currently remote. So April 5th, 5 days for K through 4, and 5 days per week for 5th grade at the middle school. That's on April 5th. April 26th, immediately following the spring break, 5 days per week, full-time for grades 6 through 8. And also on April 26th, following the spring break, currently we're planning for a hybrid model at Lowell High School with lunchtime dismissal as we await further guidance from the state. So those are the dates to keep in mind. We're really looking forward to expanding in-person learning, and preschool. We'll be assessing that after we see the space constraints and are able to get back our K through 5. If you're preschool within the Cardinal O'Connell Early Learning Center, you'll be hearing shortly about what that plan is for students who are in the Early Learning Center. There's, thank you, Jeffrey. And if I could, as we conclude, I just want to say again, big thank you to all families. I know how difficult this year has been. I know how much of a hardship has been created. Thank you by COVID-19 in all walks of life. And a big thank you for our teachers. Our teachers and our staff have been working extremely hard to make sure that we could transition as well as we could to this remote learning environment. Families, it's been an extraordinary partnership, and I thank you for all of your patience and flexibility. If it's working well for you, again, we'll be able to continue with the remote option. For those of you who are choosing to come back, it is an exciting time for us to start welcoming back more and more students to in-person learning, even though it is only a short window prior to the end of the school year. So as we conclude, thank you, truly appreciate it. Those of you that wanted to also join us for our Spanish session, that is coming up this afternoon at 5 o'clock. Otherwise, please stay tuned for your school-based information sessions that'll be occurring over the course of the next week. Thank you, families. Truly appreciate your support and partnership.